Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please smash that subscribe button. Also consider becoming a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate small amount given in the link in the description box. But the least you could do is to watch this show, like, share, and comment. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest tonight, Larry Johnson. Larry is a former CIA officer and State Department counterterrorism official. Larry, welcome back to India and Global Left.
Hey, thanks for the invite. Always a pleasant chat with you.
We haven't discussed this at all, so this is the first time we are discussing Charlie Kirk, and
Hmm.
you've been writing on certain aspects of, let's say, Charlie Kirk's assassination.
Right.
Um, if you could share what you have been writing, and I might have a couple of follow-ups then, but let's start there.
Um, I was not what you'd call a follower or fanboy of Charlie Kirk while he was alive. Occasionally I would watch some of his videos of his encounters with college students on campuses. And, he had this shtick, he'd go up and say, "Hey, prove me wrong." But he would engage students and they would have a back and forth. They would have a conversation, a debate. The thing when I did see it, and was always reminded, I never saw him being vicious, hateful, demeaning, or insulting to people. He was actually open and engaging. And when the minute when I saw the video immediately after he was shot, I knew he was dead at that point. You don't take a shot in the throat like that and lose that amount of blood and survive. But I was just sort of shocked by the vile, hateful things people were saying about him. Um, you know, he was not what I would call a rigid ideologue. A rigid ideologue is somebody who never changes, who is always, they are strictly black and white. There's no gray at all. Um, and yet, even though Charlie is viewed by some as completely compromised by the Zionist lobby, that he was funded early on by a number of wealthy Jewish pro-Zionist billionaires, that he'd been accused, and unfairly in my view, of just being reflexively pro-Israel. There's nothing that Israel does bad; it's all good. Because there is evidence now, both based on testimony from Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, Dave Smith, who received some fame or notoriety when Charlie invited him to the Turning Point USA conference in July of this year, and he debated this ardent Zionist, Josh Hammer. And what was interesting is uh, this Turning Point USA crowd, a majority of them, I'd say probably two-thirds, were very supportive of Dave Smith's position, applauding him. So there was evidence that um, Charlie was starting to distance himself from the Zionist stranglehold, and he was being threatened that he better toe the line or else they're going to cut off funding to him. So with all that as background, um, you got to ask, why was he killed? There is, again, he was not one out advocating, round up all the queers and homosexuals and we'll put them in concert. He wasn't that kind of guy. He didn't even say that about transgender people. He simply had the affirmative message that he believed God created male and female, and that there was nothing. Those were the two sexes, and all this other stuff was just a fabrication and crazy. But he didn't physically attack or call for his followers to physically attack such people. Um, the what has really caught my attention is the number of alternative theories that are being pushed on the internet, not only about who killed him, but how he was killed. So, and that's why I posted a piece at Sonar 21 where you can see that you got the actual video, and I slowed it down frame by frame because what you see in the video is initially before the bullet, as the bullet is striking him, but you can't see the strike. You see his shirt lift up, and then again, it's just it's a quick movement like this on normal speed, but that shows you that the shock wave from the bullet hitting him moved the shirt up and then down. But there are now claims that, oh, no, he was shot from behind. Well, the movement of the head is such that if I hit you in the neck from behind, your head's going to pop back. Likewise, if I hit you in the throat from the front, your head's going to come forward. If I hit you in the head, but not the neck, you know, front, back, it'll move the head. So you gotta look at those movements. Um, so there's no way he was shot from behind. Yet somebody's pushing that story out, and they're doing it in a very convincing way that people are going, yeah, that makes sense. Or the one that's really crazy is they're claiming there was a guy off to the side who had a palm pistol, a gun that hidden in his hand that he could fire it. Well, number one, we got the sound. It was from the recording of the rifle shot. There's no pistol in the world that fits in your palm of your hand that makes a noise equal to what we heard on the video and audio tapes of that incident. Number one. Number two, the guy's to the side. If he would have shot him in the side, you would have seen his head go this way, not that way. So it just, yet it's receiving traction. So you have to step back and say, who's pushing this? Who's feeding this narrative? Um, I there I believe personally that this kid um, Tyler Robinson, who did this, had been arrested and charged with the shooting. I don't think he acted alone. Um, by that I mean I think he had either encouragement, support um, to carry this act out, and it came. What sources that came from? I have a list of suspects, but I don't have proof for any of them. One of the issues early on, I had speculated that he had broken down the rifle, put it in his backpack, and then reassembled it. I was wrong on that for a couple of reasons. One, there is a video of him limping along, so he's got the rifle down his pant leg. And with the rifle in his pant leg, he can still walk and can still get upstairs without having to expose the rifle. Number two, if you do disassemble the rifle, you run the risk of altering the zero on the scope. So when you have a rifle scope and you look through that scope, you have to make adjustments on it so that when you line up the crosshairs, the reticle, that when you press the trigger and fire a bullet down range, that the bullet hits where you're aiming. And on that scope, you can make adjustments to raise it, raise and lower the field of vision, or move the field of vision right to left. So once that's zeroed, you don't want to then take the scope off, because then you're going to have to re-zero the weapon. So clearly this firearm was zeroed in, and it's not an impossible shot to make at 200 yards if you have a good scope. So we still don't know the full ramifications of this. I know that Candace Owens, who's an old friend of Charlie's, who was helping set up Turning Point USA, she's seen lots of irregularities that point to a possible hand of Zionists being involved with wanting to see Charlie Kirk murdered. There's also other evidence being put out there, or other, let's call it circumstantial evidence, connecting this Tyler Robinson's uncle to the Azov battalion in Ukraine, and Ukraine had put Charlie Kirk on the death list. So you've got both the Ukrainians wanting him dead, you've got Zionists calling him an anti-Semite. So right off the bat, and then you've got the trans community up in arms against him. So there's a number of suspects. So we got to follow the evidence to see what who did what.
Yeah, there are more or less three things. One is who killed, I mean, what led to his assassination. And as you said, a lot of theories, speculations are there, ranging from Israel to Ukraine to, you know, so-called left,
Right,
possibly from the trans community or someone who relates to those struggles. Um, let's not go there because that's a lot of speculation there.
right,
The second, of course, is Charlie Kirk's politic itself, and I don't think his politics was very innocuous. I mean, I have not been a follower of him either, but I've seen him saying stuffs about immigrants. For instance, he called for deportation of 10 million immigrants in a call for literal civil war, or let's say virtual civil war, kind of things that is completely very dangerous. I've seen another of of his talks in South Korea, going there and calling for South Korean support and sacrifice in inevitable US aggression and possibly war against China, larking back to history, which is completely wrong about South Korea's sacrifice in protecting against Chinese aggression. And we
right.
can go on and on. I mean, even his conversations about with trans community, of course, one talks about how bad U.S. education in general is, because people whom he debated often fail to put across their points in a reasonable way, and it reflects the bad general poor state of U.S. education, or let's say general education across the world. Uh, but nevertheless, I also feel we shouldn't whitewash his politics. But I think to discuss his politics will will take us towards a segment by segment discussions on each of these issues. But I think what I want to discuss and comment on what I said, if you like, but what I
Yeah,
wanted to follow up on is the implication of the assassination. And that's
mhm.
something which is really worrying for a lot of people. Donald Trump has called for purging of the radical left from American politics. He has I think it's today, he has banned Antifa, or called Antifa a organized terror groups. I mean, again, a lot of people disagrees with some of the methods of Antifa. Chris Hedges, someone on the left, for instance, disagrees with Antifa and some of their methods during the Occupy Wall Street, but he says that they are not terrorists. I mean, yes, they sometimes indulge in petty crimes, attacks on properties and so on, but you are an expert on studying terrorism. Tell me if you think they are terrorists. But on the whole, people are very scared about what this would lead to dissent within American politics. So, what are your thoughts or concerns about the purge from the administration? And then I might have one more follow up.
Sure. Well, let me first make a comment about Charlie Kirk's politics. So he was strongly against homosexual relations. However, there's a videotape. I saw the tape. In fact, I made a copy of it because it was noteworthy. At one of the Turning Point USA events, one of the members of the audience, one of his supporters, was up talking about taking action against homosexuals. And Charlie said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, wait a second." And basically, he made the case uh, he is against government advocating homosexuality as a good lifestyle and something that everybody should do. But he also said that he respected the rights of people to make choices and in their private lives, and that should be honored. And he went on to defend some prominent Republican homosexuals, and he named them off, such as a guy named Guy Benson, as an example. Um, there is no denying that Antifa is astroturfed organization. It's artificially created. It's funded by a variety of outside uh, persons, institutions, that are looking to fundamentally change the United States. And their actions, this is not a group protesting for more freedom. This is not a group that protests. They're certainly not nonviolent. They are violent, and they had advocated violence. I'm frankly surprised that it's now only now that Donald Trump has directed the Department of Justice to go after their financial, who's funding it. We've seen the same with Act Blue, of which I did some investigation of. So there is this whole network um, of that. Some of it's funded by the Soros Foundation and George Soros. So I don't have a problem with investigating them on that. Um, when you go back and look at the Antifa protests, they have been violent. They've been setting fire to public property, destroying public property, and even attacking individuals. So they've been using violence against civilians. That is terrorism. So this is not individuals out protesting. This is an organized effort. This is, I would go as far as say, a conspiracy. Now, the problem I have with what the Trump administration is doing is declaring, using this concept of hate speech, that if you say anything to condemn Israel or the Zionist activity, that you're guilty of hate speech. Uh, I believe firmly in the freedom of speech, including the freedom of people to say critical or just even nasty, evil things about Charlie Kirk. That said, that doesn't mean they have a lifetime guarantee to a job. If you occupy a particular position, but particularly if it's publicly funded, that doesn't mean you're protected, that you can say whatever the hell you want and get away with it. So I do worry that um, this, and maybe Antifa was created for this very purpose, to provoke a reaction by the U.S. government against it in order to create further turmoil in the United States. Because if you go back and look at in those communities where Antifa has been particularly active, uh, the quality of life in those cities has deteriorated. It's not gotten better. Uh, the public spaces are not clean and well kept. You have lots of drug addicts hanging out. So this Antifa movement, to say the quote anti-fascist, are in fact engaging in the very fascist techniques that we saw that were the hallmark of Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler with their movements. Um, the Antifa acts very much like Hitler's brown shirts did, 1930, 31, 32, where they were used to attack other groups, particularly the communists. So, this is not just a benign group in my view.
And you are very categorical that you would define them as terror groups. And I'm asking this because a lot of people make a distinction between individuals of an organization occasionally indulging in terror methods
Yeah,
and the organization itself being called as
yeah,
terror group. A distinction might be that um, an organization might have larger goals in the context of national liberation movement. Their goal might be to liberate their nation, but they might occasionally indulge in terror methods. In Antifa, of course, it's not national liberation, but they might
yeah,
say that we have different goals of social justice and so on, and some of them might indulge in terror activity, but nevertheless, that's not the goal of the organization. But you would not make
yeah.
that distinction
No,
here.
I wouldn't. For example, I don't consider Hamas or Hezbollah terrorist organizations. I consider them actually legitimate national liberation movements. The U.S. likes to label them as terrorists, but they have, particularly Hezbollah. Hezbollah has not been. Usually, their attacks are directed at military, so that that's not terrorism. what you see with Antifa, it's an anarchic movement. What does it stand for? But it's against fascism. Okay, well, what are you for? What's your vision? What kind of society are you trying to build? And that's where you get into this globalist agenda that's undergirds a lot of what they're saying, which is in fact, I would argue, very consistent with fascism. They they are the very thing that they claim that they're opposing. They're against this link between business and government. And yet they are being funded and paid for by very wealthy individuals who have exploited people and made their money out of that system in order to create an organization to claim that it's trying to combat fascism. So, I mean, it's just ripe with irony, in my view.
One more question finally. I guess a lot of people are looking at the the follow-up steps by the US administration in the larger context of how partisan they have been in targeting dissent in particular. So you and I both would not like the New York Times or the Washington Post, but that's very different from when Donald Trump sues the New York Times and the Washington Post because they publish
Sure.
something that doesn't like it. And it's very different because when the American president goes after a press that it sees as dissident press, it really stifles dissent and democracy, I would argue. And This has led to a lot of concern within US political commentators, journalists, etc., etc. Are you worried about this kind of partisan selective targeting of even with the high net worth individuals? I mean, you name drop Soros, but he doesn't have a overall understanding of what corporation does, how embedded power structures do to US politics, etc. He just picks up someone he doesn't like. And if they starts bootlicking him, if he would call him that person his friend. So are you concerned about the general direction in which the US administration is using this assassination, very tragic and horrific incident, to clamp down on dissent?
Not at all. I think the media ought to be blown up. I mean, Washington Post, New York Times, CBS, ABC, NBC, they're nothing but government propaganda outlets or this narrative outlet. Now, I give you just a case in point. I mean, look,
What do you mean? What do
I,
you mean by blowing up?
I mean
Because
literally destroying them,
like
bankrupting them,
legally.
taking them off the air. Look,
But what
I
if they
start,
come after us?
they're already coming after you. Don't give me that. I mean, have you been paying attention? Let me give you an example. Name me one person that speaks out against the genocide in Gaza that's allowed on any of the U.S. networks. Can you name me one?
What do you mean? I mean the mainstream press, you're saying.
Okay, name me one person that is protesting against Israel's genocide in Gaza. Have you seen them on Fox? Have you seen them on CNN? Have you seen them on MSNBC? Have you seen them on ABC, CBS, NBC? Have you seen them quoted in the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune? No. There is in fact, more often than not, if you are one of the spokespeople or someone who's viewed as a leading voice in speaking out against the genocide in Gaza, you're an anti-Semite, and that label is put on you by the press. Same thing with the war in Ukraine. Nobody, there's no voice on air anymore that's allowed to make the case about what Russia's doing and why it's doing it and why it was provoked. The only one actually who got some presence on air was Doug McGregor, and that was 2 years ago when Tucker Carlson was still at Fox News. So my point is this: you've got this media that is so corrupt, so biased that you know they now want to play the victim. So that's like I don't care what Donald Trump does to them. I would care what Donald Trump does to try to suppress open commentary like you and I are having on the internet. That I think is important. That is one of the that's still valuable. I became a TV talking head on terrorism issues in August of 1994. It started with the capture of Carlos the Jackal. After that, I did CNN, I did MSNBC, I was a Fox News analyst for the year. I was on all of the major television shows. I was on ABC's Nightline with Ted Koppel probably 12 to 14 times over a period of 5 years. I was on CBS 60 Minutes. I was on NBC's Today Show. I was the NBC terrorism analyst. So I've been on all the media. I used to be quoted. I used to be able to have a voice. And then I committed the unpardonable sin in 2008. I spoke out against Barack Obama and his ties to domestic terrorists, Bill Ayers in particular. All of a sudden, I was no longer welcomed on any of the media platforms because I had attacked the golden boy. Now, you go out and you say, let's see the list of people who are allowed on any of the TV shows to talk about the war in Ukraine or the war against the Palestinians. Is Jeffrey Sachs allowed on air? No. Doug McGregor, is he allowed on air? No. Ray McGovern? No. Scott Ritter? No. We go down the list of people that have Danny Davis? No. And so what I'm talking about is, so Trump's going after the media for being biased? Well, they are. And they've been biased in one direction.
I hear you, Larry. I think where our disagreement lies, or we'll see if that's a disagreement. I mean,
No, there's no disagreement allowed.
okay.
Okay, yeah, go
So,
ahead.
yeah, I think our view on mainstream media is exactly similar. And we, of course, even in fact, my view might be more critical given I also would look at mainstream media as part of larger corporations, whose analysis we are, of course, against. So if we are thinking about whole restructuring of media, mainstream media, then that has to come with a larger restructuring of the political economy overall. So we are looking at restructuring funding. We are looking at how, you know,
Right.
how, and then there is the political side of it, of course, which of course we oppose, like banishing you if they don't like your opinion, and that can range from the whole left wing to right wing, and that is very detrimental to a free and open and dialogic society. But
Yeah.
then we are with that agreement. I think, with that said, what does worry me is when you use the levers of the state, and you are not using levers of state as if you are coming up with an alternative transparent funding system. For instance, you are using libel suit, you are using terror laws, you are using whole range of coercive activities to be selective and partisan in targeting sometimes individual journalists, sometimes individual platforms, which you and I might not like. But why I worry about it is twofold. Yes, Jeffrey Sachs might not be in CNN, Jeffrey Sachs might not be in Washington Post, but Jeffrey Sachs does operate in the US space, and we don't take alternative media space lightly, which you and I both share. And we do operate, and there is a lurking fear that they might clamp down on us as well in the garb of things that they don't like. And so that's one. And secondly, I would add, before I let you respond, is that I don't think that kind of targeting would change the space that you and I are talking about. It would not make media free. It would not make political bias, turn in favor of more openness. What it would make is to create a very partisan and divisive space where every time one faction or another within the ruling elite grabs power, they will go after each other. And that's my worry.
Well, we've already lived through the suppression of views that was done under it actually started under the first Trump administration, but it really became intense under Biden. So anybody that challenged, for example, COVID and raised questions, they were immediately attacked and deplatformed. I had my own channel banned on YouTube for quote hate speech. What hate speech? There was never, they never said, here's what you said, because, usually the way it works in the kind of society you're envisioning is that if I accuse you of hate speech, then I got to say, okay, Jyotish, here's what you said on this date. And then you'd have the chance to say, look, I didn't mean it, or I misspoke, or I'm sorry, or I apologize. You give some chance, or say, yeah, I really said it, I meant it, and I don't care what you think. All right, that's a point. Um, you are correct in noting that I'm not looking for government to interfere more in public conversations and public discourse. I want them to actually enforce that people can speak without fear of punishment or retribution by the government.
But that's
However,
exactly the question, because people are
yeah,
now fearful
well,
about that.
but let's the latest instance got some people up in arms is Jimmy Kimmel. You know, Kimmel went on air and said that the shooter was a MAGA supporter. That is a lie. That is an absolute false thing. Now, the government shouldn't prosecute him because he has freedom of speech. But the government certainly can tell ABC, if you're going to allow this kind of false information to go out over the air, you're going to pay a price. You know, so that's where you differ between the public and the private.
Yeah, I completely agree that there should be mechanisms to uh, filter what is a blatant lie, what is defamation, et cetera, and what is a real information. And I personally think that these conversations should trigger or move us in a direction where we come up with more unbiased, independent mechanisms that can take up these jobs rather than very partisan people within the executive selectively taking up these issues in a very haphazard manner. Because I don't think, Larry, personally, that someone like Donald Trump would come to your support when you are accused of hate speech.
Oh,
Given
heavens,
what,
no. Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
that's okay. All right, let's then.
Well, let me just make the point. What we're really talking about here, and what has brought about this, let's call it suppression of speech, and the introduction of political pressure, has been the corporate ownership, the concentration of corporate ownership of the media. Um, I am free, I'm not dependent upon somebody paying me so that they can come and say either you change what you're saying or else you're going to lose your job. I, you know, I don't get paid for doing this. So I'm free in that sense. Um, there are some podcasters out there who clearly, and this is one of the things like that was happening with Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk received an enormous amount of money from the Zionist community. And as part of that, receiving that money, it was expected that he was going to toe the line and have a completely pro-Zionist message. What has happened, we know now since July, that Charlie Kirk was attacked by his donors because he was seen as straying from that message by having Megyn Kelly, Tucker Carlson, and Dave Smith speak at the TPUSA conference. But what he was also recognizing was what the messages that those three had was resonating with the kids who were, I call them kids, the people in their 20s who were attending. So he recognized that where the political sentiment of his organization was. And so he started trying to address that. We know now from Candace Owens, who has spoken to people who were at this meeting with Bill Ackman and this guy who's the founder of the Babylon Bee, that they made threats to Charlie about ruining him financially, and ending financial support for Turning Point USA if he didn't adhere to a pro-Zionist kiss Bibi Netanyahu's ass line. And he wasn't willing to do that, which then has led someone like Candace to speculate, was that a factor in having him killed? You know, I can see why she would believe that. But again, this being beholden to this money where they can dictate what you're going to say, as opposed to you saying, look, this is what I genuinely think. So you're right to be concerned that, because we had the government previously under Joe Biden going to Facebook, going to Twitter, going to all the social media and asking them to suppress the voices of people because of what they said, even if it was true. So, yeah, I don't think government should be in the business of dictating who can say what, unless it's one thing when you've got a publicly licensed network like ABC, and then someone like Jimmy Kimmel going out and just saying something that is complete. It's a complete lie. It's not accurately. You've got the indictment out there. You've got what the individual was saying, in his own text messages. Nothing about being a Trump supporter at all. However, if he had been a Trump supporter, yes, say that if that's true. But to go on the media, to go use that public platform as he did, just to lie, blatantly lie, because this wasn't about comedy. This was really more about, um, smearing Trump supporters. Now, part of what Jimmy Kimmel did, I thought was fine as far as making fun of Donald Trump with, when he was asked, he showed the clip where Trump was asked about his emotional reaction to Charlie Kirk's death, and he was like, "Oh, we're doing okay. Hey, look at that big building we're building over here." It's like there was no depth of human feeling or anything out of that, and it's all, yeah, make fun of that. That's fully, that's on the table. You can go after that, but don't lie about things that have happened where you completely misrepresent about the call. You blame one group when it's clearly not that group.
Yeah, I think what I get from this conversation is largely three things related to free speech and freedom of expression. One is what we haven't discussed a lot, but it's there in what you said, is the sort of general intolerance towards things that might not exactly fit to how you look at things. So, you might not like how a particular pronoun is expressed by someone, and you just become intolerant and you can't take it, and you create a sort of vicious cancel culture. So that's one set of problems we have. And then
Right.
the second and the third, I think you have given a, you have explained or given a much in-depth exposition, which involves corporation on one hand, and then the third, I would say, which involves government, which I'm trying to sort of bring in and sort of complicate this conversation. So yes, I am not worried about corporations, to be honest. I'm not worried about New York Times, Washington Post, or ABC's ability to defend themselves against a libel suit. I mean, yes, I do think that Donald Trump is partisan, and that's where he's coming from. But yeah, if there is something outright lie, and we have to agree that yes, it is a lie when you say that Tyler Robinson is a mega supporter, but it's
Yeah.
also a lie when a lot of from secretaries to big think tanks like American Compass, Heritage Foundation, etc., etc., they have also been lying by saying that this is a left-wing lunatic. We don't have any evidence of either, but we haven't seen the state clamping down on one set of lies, while you might be right factually to clamp down on the other set of lies. So that's the partisanship I am talking about. So in all of this, I feel in an age where we are living under the internet, where corporations are dominating these platforms. If we are not pushing for um, fairer mechanisms, then I am more worried about these small platforms, having 200,000, 300,000 subscribers, individual Substack opinion
Right.
writers like you, which might not have the influence of, CNN or Fox News, but collectively, if we sum up the sum total of all these smaller platforms, I do think they are changing public opinion and they are
Sure.
restructuring our world for a better world. And I don't see how this kind of arbitrary, reactionary, whether it's Joe Biden or whether it's Donald Trump, I see them as sort of the same factions of the ruling elites. Whether these arbitrary mechanisms, in the name of protecting free speech, in the name of fighting for facts, is helping our cause.
Yeah, no, um, the lies that are told by the government, and and particularly we've seen it out of Donald Trump's administration, this, lying about blowing up drug boats coming out of Venezuela that were heading for the United States. It's just simply not true. There was no, it was physically impossible for the two boats that we've seen on tape being blown up, physically impossible for them to reach the United States, number one. And yet that's the story that's told, and the media repeats it. And then thankfully, at least on the internet, we have some platforms where the word can get out and say, no, it's not true. And the reason it's not true is, like, with the first boat they blew up, it's got four outboard motors. The total fuel capacity of those motors is like 220 gallons, and the boat itself can travel on that fuel about 230 miles, 240 miles. Well, the distance from Venezuela to, say, Key West, Florida, the southernmost point of the United States, at least on the Atlantic side, is about 1,300 miles. So just do the math. You're going to need, roughly five times the more fuel than what you're currently carrying on board. Well, if you put those into 5-gallon jerry cans, you need about 300 of them. 340, I think, is what I calculated. That'd fill up the entire boat. There'd be no room for drugs. And what do you do with the other? So, I mean, just things simple like that. So we're lied to about that. We're lied to about the war in Ukraine. We saw Keith Kellogg just the other day said, "Hey, Russia's losing, Ukraine's winning." And that's what I told Donald Trump. So at least explains why Trump is so misinformed. Um, we're lied to about the uh, the Hamas attack on October 7th, the most devastating attack in the history of the world since the Holocaust. Are you kidding me? I mean, but they say that, and it's repeated by adults. So, yes, pushing back against these lies and trusting government. Uh, I'm not big on the trust the government or listen to what they say. That's why I believe that they always need to be challenged. But what I have seen, there has been a steady attack, more frequent attack on the so-called right-wing conservatives than there has been on the so-called left-wing liberals over the years, particularly over the last 10 years. Um, and look, I've been accused of being both. I've been attacked by Republicans as being a left-leaning conservative, kook, because I had the audacity to protest the, shaming of Valerie Plame and the attacks on her and her husband for opposing the war in Iraq. Um, and then I've been attacked by the left because of my criticism of Barack Obama. So, you know, I've grown thick skin. Uh, I think the broader principle you're talking about, though, is the valuable one, that uh, government should not be interfering in the exercise of free speech, even if they don't like what's being said. Um, there are other avenues. You got to protect people even when they're wrong, but that doesn't mean, like in the case of Jimmy Kimmel, that he's got an inalienable God-given right to host a show on that's licensed by the government.
Yeah, it's a very interesting conversation between you and I. I mean, the irony is, I might not be in principle so opposed to government intervention. In fact, in a whole range of economic activities, my views might actually dread you. And I do think that there is no principle involved in which, as long as we can make a case that this works in economic activities, government can intervene. And
Yeah,
this is what we believe on the left, as opposed to right, who thinks that there is a God-given uh, principle that cannot be violated about private property. And in principle, I might not be against government intervention, but what I'm really talking about is moving away from arbitrary actions when it particularly comes to free speech, but also a whole range of government institutions. And you and I would both dislike strongly a lot of these institutions, given they are part of a government that both of us agree that don't work for the people at large.
right.
But the remedy must not be as anarchic that it's not constructive at all. And that's the same kind of criticism about uh, that's the same kind of concern I have about uh, the executive attacking the Fed. On one hand, we just had a whole discussion about how the Federal Reserve works. It always works for corporations and billionaires through
Right.
open market operations, through balance sheet operations, how they restructure credit. They don't think about your education. They don't think about your mortgage. They think about corporate profitability, etc. So if you want to, if you want me to give a lecture on the Federal Reserve, I will spend like 3 hours talking about how the Federal Reserve is part of this corporate tyranny and capitalism, which we think
Yeah.
is bad. But at the same time, when Donald Trump comes in and attacks Liz Cook or attacks, Jerome Powell, he is not talking about these larger stakes that are involved. He is looking at one slice of something that he seems to favor himself. I mean, rate cut, even if there is inflationary situation, that's not how the Federal Reserve works. But more than that, you can have a disagreement on that, but it should not be as arbitrary as what Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Obama has turned it to be. So if American institutionalism has to revive itself, I don't think the arbitrariness of Obama or Joe Biden has to be met with an arbitrariness of Donald Trump, because they are setting, and they perfectly set it up for each other. Every 4 years, one party comes in and they justify the other they justify what they are doing in the name of the other. So I think what I'm talking about is setting up of transparent mechanisms, independent mechanism, institutions that are relatively fairer. Be very careful about things like censorship. Be very careful about institutional labeling of individuals. But to the extent we might
Hmm.
need it, given we are living in a high velocity, high volume data age, we do need some kind of limitations probably. But let it be done by institutions which are looked by large sections of people uh, uh, as fair, reasonably speaking. I mean, institutionally they might not be completely fair, but the courts are a perfect example. I mean, a lot of people who think that the courts may not work for themselves, then it works for the rich, but nevertheless they don't see the court generally as partisan in one way or another, even though the US Supreme Court differs in terms of who are appointed. But that's what I am talking about. Even when we need interventions, we have to make them independent and fairer.
Yeah. Well, in theory, we're supposed to have laws and we're supposed to have certain, in the United States, constitutional protections. And yet what we witness is that those constitutional protections are frequently ignored. And we've created a system where we indulge the fantasy that we have a free capitalist system, when the reality is we have what I'd call a form of socialism, or government controlled socialism, because it is not a market that actually favors the most creative or the most brilliant, the most innovative. It's sometimes it's a market that favors those who've got the best connections, who've got, won the lucky sperm club. They were born to the right family, um, and it has nothing to do with, personal merit. So, uh, all of this may become moot, though, with the economic chaos that the United States is headed towards, because you can't continue to run up massive debt. Okay, and it's not just that the federal deficits is what, 37 trillion and climbing. When you add in corporate debts and the debts of families, individuals, all of a sudden you've got a society that is completely enslaved by having to pay off interest and exorbitant interest rates at that. So um, a lot of this, a lot of what passes for news and information and these issues that's occupy people, I believe, are like political theater. It's set up to either distract, keep people focused upon, like a magician, focus on the shiny object in my left hand while I'm doing something over here that you're not paying attention to. And one of those shiny objects is always war. How can we, like as Donald Trump right now is trying to provoke a war with Venezuela. So far, Venezuela's leader Maduro has not taken the bait, but there's no guarantee that that's going to continue.
Yeah, let me just register my dissent in brief by saying that I don't agree with your definition of socialism and capitalism, even though I completely agree with what you described as the reality. I think you and I both agree that the system doesn't reward market, this, in the sense
Yeah,
that you and I think it should reward market, in the sense that you and I think that it should be based on merit. On the other hand, it is based on access, context, money, etc., etc. I was also struck by you mentioning the household credit and the corporate credit, because that's something that people on the right generally, and I'm not necessarily saying that you are on the right, but you're definitely not on the left. People not on the left generally don't talk about the household credit and the corporate credit, because that's apparently the private sector. It's only and if you look carefully at the relationship between the two, there is a close relationship between the two. In fact, after 2008 and 2009, since that kind of crazy expansion of the housing market and repo market came to a shuddering halt, the government deficit went up because they had to compensate the creditor class for
right,
the shrinking of the corporate debt and the household debt. So there is a slowdown of the rise of, in fact, the household debt has come down massively from 2009, from a peak of 120% of GDP to right now about 68, 69% of GDP. And corporate sector has of course increased, but it has been somewhere around 50% of GDP. Together, they are about 120%, which is roughly close to
yeah,
the overall public debt. And that public debt's increase has compensated for the decrease of the household debt, which effectively has protected the creditor class. All this is to say that I don't disagree with you on the analysis of what the reality is, even though I
yeah,
might disagree with how we define capitalism and socialism, but I
sure.
don't think that's, yeah.
Well, let me ask you a personal question.
Mhm.
Do you have any student loans?
I don't. I
Go,
studied
good for you
in
then.
free
You're ver-
public
you're very
education all my life in India.
okay. Well, and good on you. See, when I went to college, um, I went to the University of Missouri, so state university. Uh, my annual tuition, I think the most I ever, maybe the last year I paid like $600 a semester. Now we've got kids going to college that are paying 30, 40, $50,000.
70,000 in Ivy League.
Yeah. So they rack up these enormous debt. So they end up being enslaved in a way. And so that's why, the system, um, the courses I took as an undergraduate and then as a graduate student, I have I have a PhD, comprehensive field in international economics. But it was really sort of brainwashing, creating, presenting you with sort of a model of a they call it a capitalist economy, but without uh, acknowledging the extent of government involvement in that economy and in that system. So, the classic definition of pure capitalism is a free market, and everybody, you know, just those who are the best and the brightest and make the best things, they profit the most because they're more efficient. All of that was just it was a fantasy, a fairy tale. It doesn't prepare you for what the real world is, where uh, you're filled with these corporate structures and a lot of debt, and the debt is sort of a form of enslavement. So that's why I congratulate you on getting your education and accomplishing what you have without putting yourself in the poorhouse.
Agreed, agreed. Let's just end quickly because I know it's you have been very generous with your time. Just on I wanted to have your thoughts on the bombing of the buildings where the Hamas negotiators were there that led to assassination of five Hamas not leaderships but uh, 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 Hamas members who were part of that negotiation, probably,
Yeah.
and one Qatari official. We have seen a Saudi Arabia Pakistan mutual defense deal that has come off the back of these developments, and this was before that we had this massive Arab OIC GCC summit that condemned of obviously what Israel is doing in Palestine, but also the blatant violation of Qatari sovereignty to the extent that they have sovereignty. I just wanted to have your response to how you are looking at these events and what do you think uh, is a signal for the Arab states, in particular the Gulf states, who might be uh, taking for granted the protections of the Americans. Are they double thinking about their protections that's
hmm
coming from the Americans on the face of the blatant violations of Qatari sovereignty?
Well, I think the United States now has to be viewed like members of, a mafia family, so that's out extorting people or selling protection. So they walk into the local bakery and they say, "Hey, you need to sign up here for the insurance." And the baker goes, "Oh, I've got insurance." "Nah, you don't have our insurance because if you don't buy our insurance, your bakery's going to burn down." Okay, that's the United States, where uh, the Qataris stupidly, foolishly trusted the United States to have their best interest at heart. No, the United States does not have the best interest of Qatar at heart at all, because the United States is totally beholden to Israel. Israel's money calls the shots in the United States. And it's a combination of religious belief as well as financial bribery that I think accounts for U.S. On what has been up to this point unwavering U.S. support for Israel. And to that extent, the United States has worked with Israel to arrange for killing. I think the United States was directly involved with the murder of Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, because they were encouraged to. He was meeting with his senior leaders to discuss a ceasefire proposal. They had their phones. They used the phones to locate him. They knew the date and time that the meeting was going to take place. And the same thing happened here with Hamas. What changed is I don't know if it was Turkey. I've heard it was Turkey, but it could also have been Iran, Russia, or China that alerted the Hamas delegation to the fact that they were being set up to be murdered. And they got out of the conference room. They left their phones behind because the phones were what was apparently being used to identify their location so that the drone missiles or bombs could hit. Uh, so this was complete duplicity on the part of the United States. And the U.S. was directly involved. This attack could not have taken place without U.S. involvement. Uh, because of Al Udeid Air Force Base, and on that base, there's what's called the Combined Air Operations Center, the KAOC, that oversees all flights throughout the region, including flights in Iran, Syria, to the Turkish border, Jordan, Iraq. So they absolutely knew this was going to happen and it was coming. I think it had been briefed to Trump that this would succeed, that they'd kill the Hamas delegation, and that would open the way for the negotiations to proceed, and that Israel's proposals would be accepted. Well, the attack failed, and what they did is they did at least galvanize the Arab Islamic community to come together and meet in Doha earlier this week. 54 countries, everybody, Yemen to Azerbaijan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Turkey,
Iran.
Saudi Arabia, Iran. I mean, they were all there, and they produced, I think, a very comprehensive, important declaration. Now, could they have done more? Oh, absolutely. They could start by, in launching a complete embargo. All those countries are doing a complete enforced embargo on Israel. No more, and that means Turkey and Azerbaijan would have to stop supplying Israel oil. So if Israel's getting no more oil from those people, it's got a problem to deal with. But they did put on the table the proposal to expel Israel from the United Nations. That ought to be done now. They shouldn't wait. That should be the standard. So the fact that even King Abdullah of Jordan was there at the meeting and at the final declaration acknowledged his role as the protector of Islamic sites in Jerusalem, particularly the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This was really a sign of how much damage U.S. support for that attack on Qatar did to both U.S. influence in the region and then laying the foundation for these countries to come together. Because you had Pezeshkian meeting with the Iranian president, meeting with the Saudis, Mohammed bin Salman. You had Pezeshkian and al-Sisi of Egypt meet and announce that they are going to reestablish diplomatic relations with a diplomatic Egyptian presence in Tehran and vice versa for Iran and Cairo. Apparently they broke relations 34 years ago. So what you're seeing is the U.S. blind support for Israel and allowing this completely unlawful conduct is actually creating a unity now in the Arab and Islamic world that was not there a year ago.
We'll leave it there, Larry. Thanks for this conversation, and I'm glad we could go back and forth, upholding the spirit that we don't necessarily have to agree everything, and we can actually talk it out rather than shoot someone on the neck.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the importance of having a dialogue and exchanging ideas. Who knows? I might learn something from you, even though you're a youngster.
All
Hey,
right, we'll leave it.
thank you for hosting me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Larry, again. Have a wonderful rest of the day ahead. Bye.
All right, my friend. We'll see you again.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.